Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It's Monday, September 29th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 3-1 after a 24-21 win over the Minnesota Vikings at Croke Park in Dublin, Ireland on Sunday morning stateside, afternoon in Dublin. I'm Josh Yourish, and today we're going to deep dive everything Aaron Rodgers with the weekly Rodgers Report, figure out how the Steelers were able to run the ball so well with Kenneth Gainwell, and decide if the defense is fixed or if it just played Carson Wentz. But first, the Steelers are in first place, and that feels pretty notable considering where this season started, how this team looked to start the year, and the supposed juggernaut that exists within the division as well. The Baltimore Ravens, after we finished recording the instant reaction yesterday, and thank you to everyone who joined us live in that instant reaction pod and then watched it later after the football games. After our instant reaction, the Ravens in their afternoon game against the Kansas City Chiefs fell 37-20. That defense has major problems. Lamar Jackson didn't play particularly well, and the Ravens are now 1-3 on the season. The Bengals are 2-1, second in the AFC North, and play the Broncos tonight, again with Jake Browning at quarterback. So it's looking more and more likely that the Steelers could be a game up on everyone heading into the bye, and 2 games up on the Ravens and the Browns heading into the bye, as the Browns lost again on Sunday to fall to 1-3 along with Baltimore. Now the Steelers had a fairly significant lead in the division a year ago heading down the stretch, and that slipped away very quickly, but felt worth bringing up at the top of the show that for all the problems that I've brought up with this offense, with this defense, and for the relatively soft schedule that the Steelers have played throughout the first 4 games of the season, we're about a quarter of the way through, almost a quarter of the way through the year, and they're clearly in first place and in a pretty good position in the AFC North. I'm still not going to pick this team to win the division. I'm still going to back Baltimore and Lamar Jackson, but it's looking more likely than I certainly thought it would, especially with the Ravens having losses to the Bills and the Chiefs at the top of that division. It looks like they're almost certainly not going to get the bye and the number 1 seed in the AFC. And that feels notable for how everything's going to shake out in this division and potentially in the playoffs, because that might be where the Steelers end up at the end of the year. Also, we have some news. We'll get to the news in a second. If you're joining live, make sure you drop a comment, a like, subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast, and interact in the chat. We had not the most interaction in the chat yesterday, but I always love on Mondays. You drop your questions, comments about anything we're getting into. Would be a whole lot of fun. Okay. Now some news for the Steelers coming out of week 4. A couple of injury updates. Of course, the Steelers were without Alex Highsmith, Jalen Warren, and Joey Porter Jr. Some other injuries as well, Isaiah Loudermilk out long-term. But they were without those 3 in Dublin yesterday and suffered 2 more significant injuries. Jalen Ramsey and Calvin Austin are out for, quote, at least several weeks, according to Jerry Dulac. And that is concerning. So I think that's where we'll kind of start. Brandon Echols, you don't keep Beanie Bishop on this roster because you have confidence that if Ramsey goes down in the slot, then you can move Brandon Echols there and have Slay and Joey Porter Jr. on the outside. You have to hope that Joey Porter Jr. is going to come back after the bye week so you can do that. But I think the Steelers also have some other solutions with their, I won't call it depth at safety because it's their worst position on the roster, other than maybe offensive tackle, probably offensive tackle actually first. But behind Deshaun Elliott, they played Elliott in the slot quite a bit yesterday. He played all over the place. He's just the best player in that secondary. Had the interception, but he played in the slot a fair bit. I think in dime packages, they'll do that with him more. But even in the nickel, they may move Elliott to the slot a little bit if they need to keep Echols on the outside, opposite Slay or opposite JPJ. And then you can go with Chuck Clark and Juan Thornhill, and you don't love that. But it seems like that would be the pairing because Jabril Peppers did not really play at all on defense in week 4 after having a pretty nice showing against the Patriots in week 3, especially as a run defender. He was kind of one of their back end solutions to trying to shore up the run defense. He and Cole Holcomb played fairly well against the Patriots, and then they played a lot less against the Vikings. So maybe that's a look thing. Maybe that's a game script thing where the Vikings had to throw the ball quite a bit after falling behind. But we didn't see Peppers much. And now the Steelers are starting to get pretty thin in the back seven and with that secondary that already had some question marks. This is obviously the risk that you run with an aging secondary. We saw Slay go out temporarily in the game. He was able to come back in. Ramsey may be tempting fate a little bit, doing the fake injury celebration on a fumble 6 that would not be after it was overturned on replay for Jordan Mason touching it out of bounds. And then he actually got injured. And that's a pretty significant loss because I've liked the way Ramsey's played. I've talked about teams aren't scared of him in coverage like they used to be. That a lot of them are going to test him and try to push the ball deep on him. I think the Steelers did a good job yesterday against Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, which is one of the best wide receiver duos they'll face or anyone will face because it doesn't get much better than that. They were able to keep a lid on everything, keep deep safeties and zone coverages and force Wentz to try to take some underneath stuff. Obviously, there was the blown coverage late that Jordan Addison got a big catch and run on when Peyton Wilson ran him down and saved a touchdown on that play. Ultimately, they scored, but it burned a lot of time. Might have saved the game with that play from Peyton Wilson, where he reached 22 miles per hour, according to Next Gen Stats, the fastest ever recorded by a linebacker in a game since they started with the GPS tracking. It was, I imagine that might be the fastest a linebacker has ever run because he was flying to catch up to Addison and maybe save the game there. But the secondary is going to be a concern. It's also going to be something we can dig into a little bit more next week on the bye, taking a look at some of the bigger questions surrounding this team as they go forward. And maybe we'll have a little more clarity on how long Ramsey's actually going to be out. But that's a significant loss, especially as a run defender. I think his tackling around the line of scrimmage, and that's why you move him to the slot. You trust him as a big body, a physical player, a tackler who can take on blocks. I think he's done that all really well, even if he is losing a half step in coverage, especially deep coverage. So it's a loss. It's a significant one. And now you start to wonder, would this team maybe have been a little bit better off with Beanie Bishop? I don't think so, because I don't think he was particularly great. I was surprised they cut him, but I don't think he was particularly great last year, aside from, showing some good ball skills with a couple of interceptions. On offense, with Austin out, that feels maybe like a bigger problem even than Ramsey because he's clearly the wide receiver 2 on this team. He's clearly the biggest vertical threat on this team, which is crazy to say with DK Metcalf, but almost all of Rodgers' vertical shots have gone to Calvin Austin. I believe it's a shoulder injury for Austin. And Roman Wilson just isn't a dude for the Steelers. They just don't play him. I liked what I saw in preseason. Preseason's still preseason. And I don't know how well Roman Wilson necessarily would fit in this particular offense. I even think with some of the shifts that we saw the Steelers making, not pre-snap shifts, but like actual philosophical shifts that we saw from them maybe making offensively. We have to see more data, more weeks of what this offense looks like before we can say they're actually shifting. But the way they were using more big bodies, more tight ends, more condensed splits to try to run the ball to the perimeter, a 165-pound receiver like Austin isn't the best fit there. He gives you the speed pop, the vertical stretch. I like Austin a lot. I think he's he's a receiver too. Like he is a wide receiver too. But if they're going to be pound you into submission offense, especially with the outside run and perimeter stuff and the yards after the catch, that they're getting and relying on a lot with DK and Darnell Washington, then I don't know that Roman Wilson, I don't know that Calvin Austin fits in that great. I think we saw his snaps kind of decreasing a little bit in favor of Ben Skoranek, who is more of a blocker last week. But even going forward, I think that could maybe have continued if he was healthy. Now it's a bigger question because he's out. Obviously, this is the concern with a player like that at 160 pounds. He's like 5'9", 160. That's me on an NFL field. And no matter how fast you are, you're just going to get hurt. So I spinning that forward, I don't think Austin, though I like him as a receiver too, and especially as a wide receiver three, with the vertical, I keep saying, but like a deep threat from the slot is his ideal role. And if you can get another more viable wide receiver too, great. But I think he can be a two. Um, I like him a lot, but I still wouldn't pay him a long-term contract because I think you're going to run into this year after year. He was hurt in training camp, missed almost all of training camp, came back, and now he's hurt again. He was missed almost his whole rookie year, essentially had a red shirt the way Roman Wilson did because he's just an undersized guy. And to spinning things forward this season with him out, Wilson, yes, he's a vertical guy. Yes, he's a winner in the slot. He can win quickly against man coverage, especially. But I like Roman Wilson best as somebody on like deep dig routes and over the middle crossers and sitting in zones. Like I think he does that so well. He did at Michigan. We saw it in the preseason some when he has good instincts about when to throttle a route down, right? You just sit in a soft spot. That is more valuable with a quarterback that's hanging in the pocket a lot longer and a team that's not getting the ball out in absurdly fast rates like we saw Rodgers do yesterday. So it'll be something to monitor with this offense to what they're trying to do, right? With Metcalf and the yards after the catch. 149 of Rodgers' 200 yards passing yesterday came after the catch, which is a massive number. Metcalf is kind of just a different player in this offense than he was in Seattle. 45% of his snaps came in the slot yesterday. That's already the highest slot usage of his career is this season. 12.5 yards after the catch per reception for the year. That's skewed by the 80-yard catch and run, but it's still just a massive number. And the 91 yards after the catch in total yesterday. But that's a massive number and a huge discrepancy from 5.6, which was his previous career high for a season. His average depth of a target this year is 7.7 yards. He had never been lower than 12.2. These are all Aaron Rodgers things more than their Metcalf things, but he's changing how he's used in this offense. And I think that's a sign of how the passing game as a whole is going to work. You have big bodies out there, get them the ball quick, let them break tackles, hope they can get 7 yards on first down. That's a lot of what they did against the Vikings, and I think it's probably the best way to run this offense. Even Darnell Washington had 3 catches for 20 yards, and he's kind of maybe the tight end one now on this roster. More on that later when we get into the run game because I think that's where it's more interesting. But Roman Wilson and even Calvin Austin don't really fit in that, right? You might need to see if you can bring in, because Scotty Miller doesn't either. Obviously, you wanted to bring in a receiver all offseason. It wouldn't be the worst idea to try to find somebody who's just like a bigger body yards after the catch guy. This is just off the top of my head, but I know Malachi Corley got cut by the Jets, and he's a guy they drafted with Rodgers, and he's not a good receiver, not a polished receiver at all, but he's best with the ball in his hands. So I don't even know where he ended up. But just somebody off the scrap heap like that could maybe be a better option going forward if that's what this offense is going to look like. And getting to what this offense looks like, let's just jump into the Rodgers report, which is probably my favorite part of the Monday show every week. He's been called in the conversation coming out of this game. And if you watched it, you know what it was like. It was just dink and dunk and get it out quick. He's been called a point guard, right? By a lot of people. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but I think the better basketball analogy is like a point center, where you got a big 7-footer who's a really good passer, a guy that in college basketball, this is like kind of a college basketball deep cut, but Ali Khalifa, who was at BYU 2 years ago and then transferred to Louisville, hurt his knee. He's going to come back and play for Louisville this year. But he is a type of like offensive hub at the top of the key where there's not much movement. Like he is a plodding guy. He's not an athlete whatsoever, but he just stands at the top of the key. Everyone cuts and moves around him off the ball, and he can deliver that thing quickly. That's more it for me. Like I think point guard, and I think, yes, a guy that gets it out quick and just like a distributor, but somebody who can maybe just run around a little bit back there. And like, Rodgers isn't running the pick and roll, right? He's not moving really at all. This is just quickly, like truly get it out of your hands from a stationary spot. And it worked yesterday. Let's get into some of the numbers because they're pretty crazy. I'm sure you've maybe heard some, if not all of. I don't think all of them because I've dug up a fairly decent bit on this. 3.3 average depth of target. You've probably heard that. That's absurdly low. More absurd is a 2.17 second average drop back. That's just getting it out so fast. I didn't look, but it's got to be the fastest of his career. If not, I don't know what would be. His actual time to throw, like time for per pass attempt, because per drop back factors in scrambles and sacks and different things. True time to throw was 2.04 seconds. So that's just getting it out. Like so many of those plays were that where he just saw his box count, didn't like the run, smoke screen to DK, arrow route to Calvin Austin. Like just, I have the authority in this offense. If I don't like the run look, I can get it out to these guys. And he was super accurate doing it. He had 0 throws of over 20 yards downfield. Obviously, he had the 80-yard catch and run from DK, but it didn't travel 20 yards in the air. 22.7% of his throws came behind the line of scrimmage. That's two. There really weren't actually like a lot of true screens like that were classified as screens, at least by PFF, because there weren't long developing like a running back with blockers. It was just more like now routes and just get it out. And a lot of those, 22.7% of those throws were behind the line of scrimmage. The thing I think is craziest, 76% of his dropbacks were under 2.5 seconds yesterday. Highest percentage in the league in week 4. Highest percentage in the NFL for any single game this season. It's actually the highest percentage for any single game in the NFL since week 13 last year when Cooper Rush was at 77%. That's crazy. And there were a couple, like digging through, there were a couple Joe Burrow games, especially late last season, that were super high percentages of, quick game dropbacks. Like you can call those in structure or quick game, whatever, however you want to classify them. But 2.5 seconds is kind of the line of demarcation. And 76% of his dropbacks came under that. That includes a 2.1 second time to sack, which is just the 2 Redmond sacks where he won immediately. One was like a miscommunication with Seomalu where I just don't think he picked it up. And the other, Redmond just won immediately and brought him down. So that's alarming from the offensive line, right? But their pass block numbers look better because he was just getting the ball out so quickly. I think the offensive line is still a big problem. 13 for 17 for 174 yards and a touchdown on those 2.5 second dropbacks is pretty insane. Like that's absurdly efficient production. On his dropbacks of over 2.5 yards, he was 5 for 5. Now, there's a massive caveat with this. 5 for 5 for 26 yards. His average depth of target on his dropbacks of over 2.5 seconds was negative 0.2 yards downfield. It was behind the line of scrimmage. He's not buying time to push the ball downfield. If he's buying time, he's checking it down. And the film checks out with that completely. Like, it is underneath. If I'm going to get hit, I'm getting it out quick. If I've held on to this thing, 3 Mississippi, I'm almost done saying 3 Mississippi. Where's Kenneth Gainwell? And Gainwell finished with 6 catches for 35 yards. Again, I don't think this is necessarily sustainable for any NFL offense. It's more sustainable now. Like, this is very much what Ben was doing in 21 and most of 20. There are a couple reasons for optimism that I'll bring up in a second. I think it's more sustainable now than it was in 21 because we're seeing so many teams with the too high safety looks, and even Brian Flores is somebody who will, play too high safeties even when he's blitzing 7 or 6. Like, he'll bring heat and still play shell coverages. And that leaves huge voids in the middle of the defense in zone coverage. And he plays a lot of zone, like Flores specifically, but a lot of defensive coordinators now will play those drop zones behind their pressure looks. And that can confuse a lot of quarterbacks. Clearly, it didn't confuse Rodgers on this day, at least. He struggled against Minnesota last year with the Jets, but he had the answers in this one. You need to play perfect. You need a lot of yards after the catch, but you also need to play perfect to have this type of offense work as a quarterback. You need to complete such an absurdly high percentage of these throws. You need to be so absurdly accurate for this to work. This is like late career Drew Brees stuff. That's why it still kind of worked. They had Alvin Kamara, obviously that helped, but he was so insanely accurate that you're always in third manageable because he completed 2 4-yard passes where he had to be precise. And the arm might be going, but you can still do it and dink and dunk your way down the field. But you got to be consistently perfect. And we've seen that Rodgers has not throughout the first 4 weeks, especially in this type of quick game stuff. He was on Sunday. Average completed air yards in the game for Rodgers, 2.0. Second lowest in the NFL in week 4. Geno Smith is the only one that was lower. He had a really bad performance. He's been just bad this year. And I wanted the Steelers to trade for Geno Smith because I still think he's a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers right now, but he's off to a really poor start with the Raiders. So that's something for me to dig into more as a side project and where I kind of tier those quarterbacks against each other. But Geno, I would have preferred to make the Geno trade to the Rodgers signing. That looks wrong so far. Again, that's just the week 4 average completed air yards number, but 2 yards of average completion downfield is, again, just ridiculously low. And in my opinion, not a sustainable number. Neither is negative 6.2 air yards to the sticks. Eventually, you gotta, especially on late downs, you gotta give your receivers a chance and not just say, go break 3 tackles. We're living in check down city. You gotta put the ball up for grabs a little bit. Rodgers didn't yesterday because he built an early lead. The run game was working. So context matters in this evaluation, but that's a trend throughout the season and a trend I don't think can continue if you want to be one of the better offenses in the NFL, or at least an offense capable of winning the AFC North, which Steelers are fairly positioned to do right now, and the AFC North has fallen apart around them. But still, I'd like to see more aggressiveness from Rodgers eventually. I'll excuse it in this one because he was perfect underneath on these underneath throws. And he did get a ton of yards after the catch. He was constantly, and it's not even that you have to complete a high percentage of these throws, right? You have to complete them in the perfect spot so you can get the yards after the catch. There's a difference between accuracy and precision, right? Like, you have to be both, or you have to have both to operate this kind of yards after the catch quick game offense. And again, Rodgers was 1 time out of 4 games. And maybe you can say 2 times out of 4 games if you want to count week 1. that offense was kind of different, and the play action deep shots that they were hitting, I just think that Jets defense is pretty bad, and they took advantage of Brandon Stevens. But okay, 2 out of 4, that's still not enough for the Steelers offense to be good enough, unless the defense has really turned a corner, and we can get into that later. The biggest difference, though, and this is my sign for some optimism and some hope that maybe I didn't really think about before the season. Rodgers has always been, and is historically, one of the best red zone passers in NFL history. And in my opinion, some of this is juicing the numbers. Some of this is not giving goal line carries to your backs, and instead Devontae Adams quick slant for a touchdown. It would have been a touchdown either way, right? Okay. But that goes to the decisiveness, the accuracy. It takes a different kind of quarterback to succeed in the red zone when you don't have the vertical stretch. And Rodgers has always been able to do that at a super high level. Things get a little more simplified, and he likes a simple offense. We know this. We know that's why he clashed with Matt LaFleur a lot. Like, he wants old school West Coast stuff where the timing is so, like, the footwork is timed up to the route depths, and like he can trust his receivers to get it out. That's why he goes with brings a lot of veteran receivers with him that he trusts, because that timing is so important to like what he wants to do. I still think he's better in the off schedule stuff. And again, that's why you bring receivers you're familiar with. So they don't do what Calvin Austin did, forcing an interception in the end zone against Seattle when he broke the wrong way and Rodgers tried to throw for Freiermuth. That stuff seems to be coming along a little bit for the Steelers with this receiving core and with Rodgers. But also, just historically, Rodgers has always done well in the red zone. And this year, he's 5th in the red zone in red zone EPA per play this season. First in the NFL with 6.33 yards per attempt. That's kind of misleading. That's like just a couple of high red zone touchdown completions, especially in week 1. The Skoranek one was, I think, from like the 19 or the 20 off play action. But generally, he's super efficient in that area where things get a lot tighter. Russell Wilson, veteran quarterback, Super Bowl winner. That's never been his strength. Like, he was the off schedule, even more so than Rodgers, off schedule creator, deep ball hunter. Rodgers has always done that well, but he's always done this even better. As a team, 3rd in red zone success rate and 9th in red zone touchdown percentage at 69%. Now, that may not seem like a staggeringly high number, but compared to past Steelers defense or Steelers offenses, granted, some of those offenses weren't getting into the red zone all that often. Like, they were just flatly incompetent. But when they were, it was a lot of Chris Boswell field goals. And if you're converting those for touchdowns instead of field goals, that is incredibly meaningful game to game and throughout the whole year. Last season, so again, that's 69% so far this year, ranking 9th in the NFL. Last season, 29th in the NFL at 48%. 2023, 25th at 49%. 2022, 22nd at 52%. 2021, 21st at 55%. And 2028 at 66%. So you see the difference. Like, the last 2 Ben years, even when it was falling off, he was better in the red zone, the offense in general, but also the quarterback. And a lot of that is tied into the quarterback. And in 2020, when the Steelers were 8th, guess who was first? The Green Bay Packers at 77% with Aaron Rodgers. So that is something I kind of overlooked a little bit. Like, I still think the down to down efficiency is not going to be great for this offense. I still think it's largely not the most sustainable thing to be completing this many short passes. Like, we've already been down this path with Ben Roethlisberger, but if you can cash in the drives when it does work, 4 more touchdowns than field goals, you can start to pile up some wins. And I don't know that the offense is going to get to the level it needs to for me to be convinced this team can win a playoff game. And some of that is largely based off of Baltimore and other teams in the AFC and seeding and whatnot. But that's something I overlooked that's been very positive. And that to me is the thing I'm holding on to in terms of this might be better than I thought. Rodgers, for all his flaws, for all his limitations, and I've been very down, and I'm not changing my view on him or the team after one win against Carson Wentz and the Vikings. But as we're getting 4 weeks of data, like I think it's worth updating that assessment. And the red zone offense has been very good. So it's still a relatively small sample. It's something that I'm really interested in monitoring going forward. Red zone touchdown percentage isn't the most sticky statistic. So especially when it's a small sample, like I said early in the season, maybe that changes. But if it holds near 70%, you might really have something. I also, in recent weeks, trying to talk about solutions for this offense. My main one was get under center and find a way to run the ball. They did that. But I also talked about how RPOs can be a solution because if you don't have the 11-man run game to run the ball out of shotgun, you need to be an RPO heavy team. And I think this was anecdotally, I would say this was their most RPO heavy attack of the season. Rodgers leaning into being kind of that dart thrower and the optionality of it. That is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that the run game got a pretty big boost. But also Kenneth Gainwell was just awesome. So we can jump into that now in this running game going forward and what it's going to maybe look like. Like, is this what we're going to get? Was this a one-off? To start with Kenneth Gainwell, and I don't think he's the biggest story. He was really good, though. I think the biggest story is like the things they were doing to put him in situations to succeed. But he did succeed in those situations. He forced 7 missed tackles yesterday, averaged 1.89 rush yards over expectation per attempt, according to Next Gen Stats, 4.11 yards after contact per attempt. That's good running. Like, that's a good day's work for any running back, especially one that I've been pretty down on throughout the year and didn't really think should be getting carries over Caleb Johnson and taking any work away from Jaylen Warren. I still think it's certainly Warren's backfield when he gets back healthy from that knee injury that kept him out on Sunday, which was kind of out of the blue a little bit, felt like. So I don't know how long that's going to linger, but really positive performance from Gainwell as a runner. He was legitimately good. But in my opinion, the bigger reason that they started to have success is they were just more committed to what they want to be on the ground. And that's outside zone, that's pitches. Like, there was still a lot of gap scheme runs and they were varied in their attack. But they want to run to the edges of the defense. So again, I mentioned before and I mentioned yesterday, like those condensed splits, but it's also the big bodies and the big bodies on the edge of the offensive line to give you more running lanes out there, especially because Broderick Jones and even Troy Fautanu, I just don't like them as those lead blockers on outside zone runs or anything. So heavy personnel, let's get even heavier. Darnell Washington was on the field for 27 of the team's 28 run plays and played 48 snaps in total. Spencer Anderson was on the field for 15 of those 28 run plays. So those two were out there together constantly. Spencer Anderson is clearly the swing tackle for this team. And I love going essentially 7-man offensive line. Sure, get huge. All right. Like, who can match that? What defense in the NFL can match 6 offensive linemen plus a 300 and whatever, maybe 320 pound tight end who can actually catch passes? Because I don't think there's any defense that can do that. They have to keep some coverage bodies out there, right? You're largely declaring that you're probably going to run the ball with those guys out there, but they threw the ball a lot with Darnell Washington on the field. You have to do that so you can declare to the defense, we want you to put your big bodies out there, put your base defense on the field, right? And then we can throw off of this. It was really impressive. And even Ben Skoranek played 18 snaps as a run blocker in this game. They want to be big. They want to win to the perimeter. This is how you have to do it. Like, commit to it. You haven't been good at it for the first stretch of the Arthur Smith run as offensive coordinator here. So figure out a way to make it work because it's so paramount to this offense being functional. And I know Rodgers isn't going to be doing like the play action boot stuff and like the long drop backs, but you can access the middle of the field more once you get the defense spread sideline to sideline. You can do more of the quick game stuff. You can bring bigger bodies on there and take more shots downfield. You can just take advantage of the fact that you have a 230-pound wide receiver who's going to knock back a nickel, right? I think that's a big reason they played him in the slot a lot more. You want to get him off of press coverage, get him some more free releases. Like Greg Olsen talked about that a lot, about why they moved him in the slot. And it clearly seemed like that was something they tipped Olsen off to because he talked about it immediately in the broadcast, and they being the coaching staff, like in their production meetings. And Olsen was on it right away, and then it bared itself out throughout. He played 45% of his snaps from the slot, which is just not DK Metcalf at any point in his career, but it worked great. And I think part of that is get another big body near the line of scrimmage, tight to the formation, and let him block a nickel so you can get Gainwell to the edge. And their runs to the edge in this one were great. 69 of their 131 rushing yards came off the end of the line. That's off of the tight ends most often in this situation. 12 of their attempts, 6 of them went for first downs, and they got 10 rushing first downs in the game. One of those on a QB sneak. So essentially, 6 of their 9 traditional rushing first downs came on those runs to the edges. And last week, they had 6 attempts for 31 yards. Week 2, 8 attempts for 25 yards. Week 1, 8 attempts for 15 yards. So they were committed to doing it this week, and they did it much better because they brought more big bodies on the field. And typically you think when you're bringing additional offensive linemen, it is to run duo. Like it is to be big and get to the second level. They're doing it for toss plays, and they're doing it for outside zone stuff. And that can happen when you have a guy like Darnell Washington who's just so big and so athletic. And you have DK Metcalf who can crack down, and Ben Skoranek who can. There were times they motioned him and had him on like a C-gap insert blocking to the second level. Like, I love the way they ran the ball schematically in this one. I don't know if teams are going to have many answers to it, because what's your answer to we're a lot bigger than you right now? Brian Flores didn't have one. I think this can activate Caleb Johnson as well, because Johnson was so good. The reason I love that pick, he was so good on toss plays at Iowa. He has great vision for them. He has great patience, and then burst once he finds the hole, like build up speed. But even as a one-cut runner, like he can accelerate through those holes. I think they're going to start maybe trusting Caleb Johnson a little bit more. And I think he'll do really well if they commit to being this big jumbo outside zone team. That's a fun wrinkle. That's an interesting wrinkle that coming into the year, I said for this offense to work, to be its best version, they have to be kind of weird, because their best strength is all the tight ends. Their best strength is like the physicality of it. And they're not good traditional run game. Their offensive line is still kind of has a lot of question marks, but they're going to have to rely on like tight end screens and quick throws to DK Metcalf and being big and weird. And they finally kind of were. I'm really encouraged by the way this offense is evolving throughout the first 4 weeks of the season. I think it's growing in a way that the Steelers haven't been able to in years past. And some of that is like a lot of that is just credit to Arthur Smith for finding solutions to this thing. But I think some of that might be Aaron Rodgers. Like, I don't want to get too over my skis, just crediting every good thing. Well, that's what happens when you have a veteran quarterback. Everyone did that last year with Russell Wilson. And a lot of what happened when you have a veteran quarterback like Russell Wilson is you're super limited on offense and super reliant on deep ball variance. With Aaron Rodgers, there comes a lot of, at 41 years old, comes a ton of limitations to your offense. But I do think at least he's been willing to get under center a lot more this week after in the past 2 weeks. I think it was leaning more towards too much shotgun and they weren't able to run the ball out of it. He's allowing it to grow at least, so deserves some of that credit. Grayson Brown in the chat. Appreciate you joining again. Grayson, I know you were in the chat yesterday. Agreed, the run game activation is very encouraging. KJ just needs to gain confidence in the NFL and get better each day. He needs opportunities in order to do that. I totally agree. That gets a little bit tougher when Kenneth Gainwell plays as well as he did because, like where are those going to come from? Where are those opportunities for Caleb Johnson going to come from? But I do think it's still important to build him into a viable NFL running back. The talent is definitely there. He wasn't able to, he had a couple nice runs yesterday, like no broken tackles or anything. I want to see more of that. But he's not a lateral guy. He's not like an agility. He is a build up speed and go. And I think the way they're running the ball right now is much better for that type of back. So I think we can see it. We're going to see it a lot more. And this is the Darnell Washington effect. Like, you drafted Darnell Washington for a reason. When you draft such a unique tight end, you have these unique players. You have to find a way to maximize them. And I think the Steelers are finally doing that with Washington. He's involved in the pass game. That's just going to happen if you keep somewhat even run pass splits with him on the field, right? Like, he was out there for every run, but he was also out there for a lot of pass plays. He played 48 snaps in the game. Then you can keep defenses, you can dictate who comes onto the field for a defense, but not declare what you're running. And that's where you can find a lot of success. That's why, as Grayson points out in the chat, like these jumbo packages and these 12 personnel looks are booming across the league, not just in terms of success, but in terms of usage. Like, I don't have the specific numbers for 12 and 13 personnel right now, but they're both league highs just across the NFL over the last stretch of years. Both are climbing year over year. And I've talked about this some in the offseason and whatnot, but it allows these offenses to dictate to the defense what's going to happen, because defenses have gotten really good at forcing offenses to do what they want them to do with these shell coverages, with these disguised pressures and simulated pressures. They're forcing them to get the ball out really quickly and underneath, and they're taking away explosives, and they're saying, to beat us, you got to run the ball. 12 personnel claims some of that power back for the offense. If you use it correctly, it can claim some of that power back for the offense, because it can say, now you got to play base and defend us in the pass out of base. Good luck. You can't have all these DBs flying all over the place. You can't be so, unique in your pressure looks and your stunts, because we can hit you in the mouth, but also we can play action off of this and hit these massive tight ends as receivers in the pass game. And Darnell Washington is the ultimate version of that, because he's an offensive tackle. He's built like he's bigger than Broderick Jones, flat out. And he's a really good receiver. So I think he's going to be one of the most important players for this team going forward. I'm thrilled to see the way they're using him. Frustrating somewhat that it's taken this long to get here, and that they, have Jonnu Smith, who was a Pro Bowler last year and caught 91 passes, and have Pat Freiermuth, who they paid. But Darnell Washington is probably the best tight end on this team. And he's at least the tight end that causes the most problems for a defense. He can be kept in pass protection when you need extra help there, like when you're trying to take some shots. They didn't need to dial up any deep shots against the Vikings because they were playing with the lead so much, but they're going to eventually. And I still think Washington being out there and even Spencer Anderson as this swing tackle is giving you a much better chance to do it. And for the first time in many years, I feel somewhat confident about what the Steelers are doing drive to drive offensively, like the philosophy there, and that somebody very competent has their hands on the wheel. Like I'm not blown away by Arthur Smith. I don't think he's gonna get another head coaching job anytime soon. But Rodgers is the best quarterback he's had since Ryan Tannehill. And I think you're seeing a pretty functional offense with him. So I'm encouraged. I'm finding myself more encouraged about the Steelers offense than I thought I would be. And again, I'll couch it all in saying a pass game with an average air yards per completion of 2 yards downfield is not sustainable, especially against the better offenses when you need to really keep up. This run game might be, though. So I think you can get by against a lot of opponents this way. As we pivot to the final topic of the day, is the Steelers defense fixed or did they just play Carson Wentz? I'm going to take this time to remind you to subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast if you have not already on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast, like this podcast, like every podcast. Go back and watch old podcasts. Watch the instant reaction yesterday, which I know was doing pretty well with numbers wise, and we appreciate that support. We love this thing to continue building with 3 shows a week and getting Mark involved for instant reactions. It's just so much fun throughout the season. This year, it feels like we can take it to another level. So we appreciate your support. Please like and subscribe. And also, you can follow me on Blue Sky at Yourish3. I will put it back up on the screen because I share all the updates about the show and whatnot there. That's where I'm most active. I'm not terribly active on social media, but I am not active on X at all. I'm active on Blue Sky. So if you have a Blue Sky, go and follow me there. All right. Now, is the Steelers defense fixed or did the Steelers just play Carson Wentz? A note, I think you saw why the fumble luck isn't a viable way to win games defensively. It was still in a win, but the Steelers forced 2 fumbles and they didn't recover either of them. And sometimes that just happens because of random things like Jordan Mason having one leg out of bounds and putting his hand on the ball before Jalen Ramsey could pick it up and run into the end zone. And a strip sack where nobody on the defense found where the ball was, and Will Freeze, the guard for Minnesota, was able to dive on it. You got the strips. Everyone said, well, the defense forced those turnovers. Yes, they did. This is one of the most aggressive defenses in terms of stripping the ball, going after the ball. You can't rely on recovering all of those. It's better if you're forcing more fumbles, yes, but the luck of forcing 5 of them and recovering all 5 that's just not going to happen. So that's not a good statistical sticky thing for a defense. What is having one of the most disruptive defensive lines in the NFL, which was the plan when you drafted Derek Harmon. And we're maybe seeing it come to fruition. 7 pressures for TJ Watt yesterday. Nick Herbig had 4 and 1.5 sacks. Keanu Benton, 4 pressures, 1.5 sacks. Needed that bad after the way he started the season. He's kind of been a whipping boy for everybody in, Pittsburgh media and breaking down the Steelers, and myself included. Not for his play so much, like for him playing out of position at nose tackle. And Benton played just 6 snaps at nose, 40 at defensive end. Some of that, again, is game script dependent because the Steelers had such an early lead. The Vikings were throwing the ball almost the entire second half. You don't need to play as much base. They didn't play as much base, but it's also, I think, a recognition because Daniel Akwale and Y.A. Black handled more of those nose tackle snaps in the game. I think it's an admission that we got to put this guy at 3 tech. We got to let him be a penetrator because that's what he does best, not holding up at the point of attack against double teams and whatnot and keeping our linebackers free. And I think because Benton's not getting washed out at the nose as often, Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson are free and they are flying around a lot more because that's one of the fastest linebacker duos in the NFL. They still have big issues in coverage. And I think that's going to be like against veteran quarterbacks, especially who, know where the answers are against cover 3. And the Steelers continue to just play a lot of cover 3. It was more cover 4, cover 2, like 2 deep safety looks yesterday. But those veteran quarterbacks just know how to attack the middle of the field where the Steelers are weak in coverage. And I think Peyton Wilson hasn't gotten better enough in that area. Maybe he will. But in the run game and as blitzers, Queen and Wilson had really good games and they racked up a lot of tackles. I was super encouraged. I know Queen had 5 stops. That's a big number. I believe his best of the season. He looked like a different player than against Seattle and New England. And so I'm pretty encouraged by that. And I think a lot of it stems from the defensive line. And a lot of it on the defensive line stems from getting Derek Harmon back because you're just so much deeper in that group. He had 3 more pressures, a batted ball for the Elliott pick. Jack Sawyer had 2 pressures on 10 pass rush snaps. Like he's not getting used a lot. They're running TJ Watt and Nick Herbig out there a ton while Highsmith is still hurt. But when he's in there, he's able to make an impact. So there's a lot that I'm encouraged about on the front, especially when you get Highsmith back. I am pretty adamant that even when Highsmith comes back, and even as great as he played in week 1 with 8 pressures, he is the 3rd edge rusher. It is TJ Watt, it is Nick Herbig, and it is maybe not in that order. In terms of pass rushers right now, I think Herbig is more disruptive than Watt. He just wins so quickly. And by ESPN's pass rush win rate, he was 2nd in the NFL last week to Abdul Carter. Or on Sunday, I guess it's still pending Monday Night Football. That per Seth Walters Blue Sky. He just consistently wins. And yes, TJ Watt creates a lot of one-on-ones for him because a lot of the chips go TJ's way. Understood, but he was also going one-on-one against Christian Darrisaw, who's one of the better left tackles in the NFL, and just whipped him all day. I love the way this team is working together on the defensive front. I talked about some of that yesterday. The broadcast pointed it out really well, like rushing in tandem with Watt, going inside so Herbig can loop, and you're flushing once to the right. Like you're being deliberate about how you're winning. I think the pass rush plan as a team is better this year than it has been, where it's gotten really stale in the past and it's been a lot of TJ save us. I think it's less of that, and that's what happens when Herbig is healthy and developing, when Harmon is here and looks like a dude, and Benton is getting better because of that because he's getting more one-on-ones, and Cam Hayward is still just really impressive. So I think that group can be one of the better defensive lines in the NFL. Maybe not quite, like I'm not going to list the best ones. The Giants have, maybe more talent than anyone. The Browns are right there with Garrett and now Mason Graham and somebody to take advantage of the one-on-ones that Garrett creates. But the Steelers you put it up against just about anybody right now. Not after week 2 or even really week 3. But after week 4, you feel that way. And massive caveat, the Vikings came in without Donovan Jackson, their left guard. They lost their center, Ryan Kelly. They lost their right tackle, Brian O'Neill, both early. So they were down 3 offensive linemen. It was a mash unit on that offensive line. And the Steelers were able to take advantage and feasted. Great. They were also facing a quarterback who has a tendency to hang onto the ball for a long time. So they got a lot more sacks because of it. There are reasons to be a bit trepidatious about this defense is totally fixed because the defense also played Carson Wentz and that offensive line. But it's a lot better and it's a lot more disciplined than it was in the first week of the season. So, I mean, Mike Tomlin continues to be massively frustrating to me on Sundays with his clock management and just a lot of decisions. But I think you kind of can see in some ways why he's one of the better Monday to Saturday coaches in the NFL because okay, if you're trying to steal tackles for loss and you don't have good gap discipline and you're not playing through the face of the offensive lineman or the blocker and it's leading to huge runs for Kenneth Walker, that's not going to fly much longer. And at least it didn't this week. Like it looks a lot cleaner. It looks more disruptive. Hopefully that sticks when you face better offenses. Because right now, that defensive line, which needed to be the strength of the defense, needed to be the strength of the entire team for this roster to reach its ceiling. And this is not an all-in year because they have so much draft capital tied into next year. But it is an aging roster with a quarterback in what I think is certainly his final year that would love and a head coach that needs to win a playoff game. So a lot of chips are pushed in and rely on that defensive line being a pretty dominant unit. For the first time this season, it actually looked like it. And it came in advantageous circumstances, but I'll take it. And then let's see as we get further along and play some better offenses, some better offensive lines, some better quarterbacks. But I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged all around. This is certainly the most positive I've been throughout the season. There are a lot of reasons that, things I'm still couching this in. I think the quarterback's super limited. I don't think this team's going to win a playoff game. And I think the defense still has issues, especially with an aging secondary. And you see it with the Jalen Ramsey injury. But I'm encouraged. And I think this team is heading into a really positive direction as they go into the bye week. So we'll continue to talk about it and hit on some of the biggest questions of the bye week and everything coming on Wednesday. Tommy Jagai, Shane Kubis, as always, do a great job breaking down the previous game. This time they don't have a game to look ahead to. They have a bye week to look ahead to, but they'll break down everything. So be sure to be subscribed and watch that one on Wednesday, going live at 1:30 p.m. on YouTube and on demand later that day, wherever you get your podcasts. This will be the last time I'm talking to you until next Monday. So kind of a long layoff with no instant reaction show. Until then, have a great week. Enjoy the Steelers being in first place in the AFC North. And as always, go Steelers.